understanding or failure to perceive what was happening in that region. Changed the whole political paradigm. Changed the whole geopolitical paradigm. So it becomes necessary, therefore, for every black politician to get on a plane and fly to Tel Aviv. Have you ever noticed that? Every black congressional, I don't know if my brother over here has made this trip yet. Every black politician. He made this trip already? Oh, he made this trip. He's up front.
Wait a minute. Since you're calling on me, brother.
Now, Jackie, did you make a trip?
You're calling on me. I've also been to Gaza.
They let you in, though, didn't they?
Well, you know, would it be better if I didn't go in?
Yeah.
Okay, so you don't want me to go to Gaza. So you actually
No, I'm telling you, you know why I tell you it would have been better if you didn't go?
The people I talked to wanted me there, wanted me to bring their
People
story
in
back.
Gaza want everybody there.
So why shouldn't I go to try to bring their story?
Nobody said you shouldn't go. You said it would have been better if I didn't get in. That's what you said.
No, I said if I didn't go.
No, you said it would have been better if I didn't get in.
I said, well, do you want a semantic thing?
Okay, fine. It would have been better if you didn't get in. Now, if it would have been good if you went and you didn't get in.
Well, I'm glad I did go, and I'm going back.
Well, I know you go back, and I know you get in.
Well, you know, I mean, you know, the thing is, man, is that if you've been, I remember sitting down with you when I was a law student about 20 years ago.
Oh, and this is what happened?
And, you know what? I'm not taking it personally. I'm taking it.
I'm only joking. I'm only adding some humor.
Okay. And so I'm taking it seriously, not personally. And so look, there's a lot of things I would like to say, to I think bring another perspective to the one you just given. But tonight's your night, so I'm just not going to do that.
Every night's my night.
Well, and so
I mean, you can feel free. It doesn't. I mean, that's what.
Well, no.
I think folks here would be interested in hearing that themselves. Well, because you see the problem. You see the situation here is the reason why I mentioned you, and it wasn't personal. It wasn't personal at all. The reason why I mentioned it is because when we understand how the opposition works.
Yeah.
A lot of time the opposition works by preparing the way with people who have good intentions and that they know have no power. And now that you may have had the best of intentions.
So think it through, brother. So what you're saying is working to change this system with good intentions is ultimately a futile thing to do. I mean, you've made a lot of good critiques. I think
is that a question that you're asking me? That statement right there is working to change the system with good intentions. Is what was the final part?
You're saying that's futile? You're saying that we should just not engage? I mean,
no, that's not the alternative to that. You made a statement. You asked me, was working to change the system with good intentions futile? Yes.
Well, I don't agree with that. And so, I think that you lead people down a path where they feel nothing's going to... You said once you know something, you either have to do something about it or you have to admit you don't care. That's wrong. People know that there's something going on, but they don't feel they have the power to do anything about it. It's not a matter of not caring. It's a matter of not feeling the power to do it. And so,
So you feel that you're empowering people?
I feel that I'm trying to do the best I can with what I have. And so look, but I don't know. I mean, think about you, man. You haven't brought about socialist nirvana in America either.
I'm not a socialist.
Well, whatever kind of world you're trying to bring about.
And I've never tried to bring about socialism. Let me be clear about my motives here.
Right.
My motives are very simple. Ain't nothing complicated about me. I don't like oppressors. I don't like exploiters. Wait a minute, let me finish. I don't like time. Wait a minute.
Do something.
I'm coming.
Right.
I don't like tyrants. I don't like oppressors. That's why I spent 19 years in prison. I didn't spend 19 years in prison because I felt that I had good intentions and I was going to try to change the system. I know the nature of tyrants. I know the nature of oppressors. It's right there in history. They could have did that. They could have bumped me right off, but they didn't. I'm here talking to you. And why do you think that is?
Is that a question to me?
Yeah.
Why do I think...
How do you think I wound up in this place talking to you at this moment in time?
Is that a cosmic question? Or
you can take it as a cosmic, as a subjective, as an ontological question. Well, here's a cosmic about it.
Well, here's how I answer your question. First of all, much of the critique that you have, I'm not here to dispute. But I think that at the end of the day, if all you have is a complaint,
No,
then it doesn't lead
no,
anywhere.
like I just explained to people
Wait a
here that
minute.
the only way
Wait a
that we
minute.
can begin,
I was
that's the
sitting-
only way.
No. I was sitting here listening to you. You kept up with you know. You know what? I'm not up here. I'm out.
No, go ahead, finish what you're saying. I know what people are thinking, but it's not, I know it's not that. But I'm saying just finish what you're saying.
No. Okay, well, okay, so how much, do I get a moment to talk, or you?
Go ahead, finish what you're saying.
Well, first of all, let me just start off with the first thing, one of the first things you said, which is, that the reason that Obama is in there is because he's more white than black.
No, that's not what I said.
Well, he had more in
That's part
common.
of it.
He had more in common with whites than blacks. What about this? What about this reason? What about?
Hello, everybody. Is my mic working? It looks like it's working. Hello, everybody. Greetings. My name is Onya Sanu, and this is my comrade Monica. You were just listening to audio of an exchange between former Black Panther Party member and former Black Liberation Army member Dhoruba bin Wahad and the current Attorney General of Minnesota, Keith Ellison, who also used to be a congressperson, who was also a former co-chair of the Democratic National Convention, in a debate basically about revolution versus reform, with Dhoruba representing the reform side, or the revolution side, and Keith Ellison representing the reform side. And in that audio, you basically hear Dhoruba bin Wahad dismantle Keith Ellison's entire worldview in a fashion that I find to be hilarious. If you want to listen to the whole audio, which I highly, highly recommend, I'm going to drop the link in the chat. But again, it's basically a debate, a public impromptu debate between reformist and revolutionary politics. And in my opinion, revolutionary politics won that debate. Revolutionary politics won that debate. So I'm just going to drop it in the chat. If you want to listen to that whole audio, highly recommend you check it out. But yeah, I just want to do something a little bit different for the show this week, and I really appreciate that audio. I listen to it every so often because it's just hilarious. But anyway, my name is Onya Sanu. This is my comrade Monica. We are members of the New Mexico chapter of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and this is our weekly show, Weekly Pan-African News. We have been doing this for almost exactly a year. We started at the beginning of the pandemic last year in March because we wanted to continue to reach our people, but we didn't want to gather them in person when it wasn't safe to do so. And so we started doing this show where we talk about current events, we provide political education, and when we share what we're doing here in the community and the analysis of the APRP about what's going on in the world. We have a very, very loyal following, such as our comrade Bird, that we deeply appreciate. And we do this show every single Thursday at 12 p.m. Mountain Time. So we always like to open the show with two things. Two things we always do at the beginning of every single show. The first thing that we always do is that we bring in an ancestor. And the reason why we bring in an ancestor is because we understand as revolutionary African women, as revolutionary Pan-Africanists in a revolutionary Pan-African socialist organization, that all of the work that we do to fight for the liberation of Africa and African people is built on a foundation that was laid by the people that came before us, that was laid by our ancestors who've been fighting for centuries, who actually began their fight for liberation the very first moment, the very first European set foot on the shores of Africa. So understanding that we wouldn't even be here talking to you if not for the work of the people that came before us. We always want to honor our ancestors. We always want to uplift their work and their memories. We always want to give thanks and continue to learn from them. And also, quite frankly, revolutionary African ancestors are quite often lied upon and misrepresented in a capitalist and white supremacist society. And so this, feed dropped. All I see is the loading wheel. 12. Let me see. On my end, it looks like it's still going. Is it going for you, Monica? It's okay on my end, but I was having that issue during the audio. Cool. Well, if y'all continue to have problems, I'm trying to see if the stream on my end catches up with whatever's happening. Cool, you're good? Thanks, Kevin. Cool. So as I was saying at the beginning of every show, we always do two things. We call in an ancestor and we do a land acknowledgement. And so we call in an ancestor to acknowledge the work of the people that came before us, to acknowledge the work of the people that made it possible for us to be talking to you today, and also to tell the truth about revolutionary African ancestors and revolutionary African leaders, because we understand that a capitalist society does nothing but lie on them, does nothing but misrepresent them, just like it lies on and misrepresents African people in general. And so that's all the reasons why we do this. And the ancestor we want to call in today is a very special revolutionary African woman whose birthday was yesterday, March 4th. Or wait, no, today's March 4th. It's today. Her birthday is actually today. And that woman is Miriam Makeba. Miriam Makeba. And if you haven't heard her name before, it's not your fault. No one's ever going to elevate a revolutionary African woman. But for those that don't know, Miriam Makeba was a revolutionary African woman from Azania, also known as South Africa. She was an organizer in the struggle against apartheid, and she was also a singer, a revolutionary African artist and cultural worker who sang about the struggle against apartheid, who sang about the struggle for African liberation, who basically provided a soundtrack for militant anti-colonial struggles across the African continent and diaspora. She also happened to be the wife of Kwame Ture. If people don't know who Kwame Ture is, he is one of the leading figures within the All African People's Revolutionary Party, a former member of SNCC, and the Black Panther Party, a revolutionary African man born in Trinidad. So this is like a match made in heaven. This is like a true power couple that found each other, that fell in love, and that during their relationship was on the front lines fighting for the liberation of our people. So salute to Miriam Makeba, and also salute to ancestor Kwame Ture. So the other thing that we always do at the beginning of every show is we want to acknowledge that we are on stolen land. And I want to say, when the APRP does a land acknowledgement, it's not just to say like this land is stolen and we're going to keep it. No, it's to say this land is stolen. There are indigenous nations fighting to get their land back, and they will get their land back, just like we're going to get Africa back. So we are speaking to y'all from occupied Tiwa territory, also known as Albuquerque, but Albuquerque is the name that Spanish colonizers gave this land. This land belongs to the Tiwa Nation. The Tiwa Nation is still here, and the Tiwa Nation will get their land back. When we do an acknowledgement, it is not a metaphor. We are saying land back. The Tiwa Nation will get their land back. All indigenous nations of the Western Hemisphere will be getting their land back. Palestinians will be getting their land back. All African people will be getting our land back. Indigenous Australians are going to get their land back. Irish people in Ireland, who are in fact colonized, will be getting their land back from the British. Land back to all colonized peoples all around the world. Literally, land back. So those are the two things that we always do. And then the next thing that we always do is we always want to have a political education topic that we discuss in depth from a revolutionary African perspective. And this week, that topic is the role of the police. Why police are a force for oppression under capitalism. And to kick off the conversation, I'm going to pass it to my comrade, Monica.
Thank you so much, Onyesawu. So excited to do this show today, and excited to learn about another ancestor that I didn't know about. So I'm always learning. I'm always in a learning space. So talking about the origins of police is what I'm going to talk about. And so police in the US empire, as many of you know, and maybe some of you don't know, the police were created as a way to protect and serve the property of Europeans, slavers. And so the means of police were controlling our ancestors who were enslaved. So what they had slave patrols that were at like rivers and lakes. So our ancestors, to stop ancestors from escaping to their freedom. They also had them to keep control of ancestors who they felt that were defiant against the rules of the oppressors. They also used them to capture our ancestors, enslaved Africans that were running away. So the history of policing is embedded in oppression, is embedded in capturing Africans who are running for their freedom. That's literally the history and origins of police. And then also, you know, as slavery got abolished, which it never did, right? But what occurred in that was you had continued oppression, and you also had the formation of the KKK. And what people have said is, oh, the KKK has infiltrated the police. No, the KKK are the police. They always worked in collaboration with the police. They were the police. It was very clear what what they stood for. And so the history and the evolution of policing has always been embedded in white supremacy to do control. That's the force of control. There is this myth that police are there to solve crime, to stop crime, prevent crime, excuse me. And police will tell you themselves that is not their role. They are not able to prevent crime. And so policing has always come with lethal and violence. And that's the origins of police, and it hasn't changed. Even in the year of 2021, it still continues to focus on control and violence. And that's what I have about the history of policing.
And the only thing I'd add to what Monica just said, that extremely important breakdown of how American policing, U.S. American policing, came directly from slave patrols that are trying to recapture our ancestors, is that the origins of American policing are also found in the organization of European settlers who wanted to make sure that they could steal indigenous people's land and not have to deal with consequences for that. So the origins of U.S. American policing come from slave patrols, like Monica just laid out, and also from European settlers organizing themselves to steal indigenous people's land and then protect that land from indigenous people that are trying to take it back. Like, that's where that came from. They were trying to repress enslaved African people, and they were trying to repress indigenous people, which is a really good segue into the next thing we want to talk about, which is—
Can I add one more thing to
Yes, go
to
for it,
that?
go for it.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. So thank you so much for bringing how police were using taking indigenous land, how that was used. Also, because of white supremacy, Europeans use police as catering to their every need. So all those jokes and stuff about Karen is real, right? There's millions of Karens, right, who utilize the police to cater to their needs, right? And so that's because, again, it was to protect and serve property, protect and serve Europeans, which did not mean protect and serving anyone, right? But people who were wealthy and people who had power. And so that's all it was about power and controlling people, power and controlling the land. And turning it back to my comrade, Anya Sawu.
100%. You gave me like the perfect segue into the next section to talk about the role of police under capitalism and settler colonialism. As previously discussed on the show, the United States empire, the U.S. as a nation, is really just an overgrown European settler colony. The U.S. was founded because European colonizers came from Europe to this land and committed acts of genocide against indigenous nations and straight up stole their land. They came here from, Britain, Spain, what's the other place? Denmark. Where are the Dutch from? Amsterdam. They came from all these like raggedy ass European countries to the Western Hemisphere. They saw indigenous nations here. They committed acts of mass violence against those indigenous nations, like killed women and children and elders, poisoned the water, burned the land, stole that land, built new cities on top of it, imported our ancestors, like kidnapped them from Africa, brought them here to work and to build this nation. So the United States was literally founded on a foundation of genocide, land theft, and slavery. That's what we mean when we say the United States is an overgrown European settler colony. It's a settler state. It's built on a foundation of stolen land and slavery. So understanding that, these Europeans came here and there were millions of indigenous people. They brought millions of African people here. In order to maintain this foundation built on theft and genocide and slavery, they had to create a force in order to protect them from us. Because there was a point when indigenous and African people outnumbered Europeans here. And those Europeans understood that they could not hope to keep hold of what they had stolen without some kind of force to protect them from us. And so that force they created was organized militias of European people to repress African and indigenous peoples. That is the origin of policing in this country. It was always, always, always about protecting the property, the stolen property of European settlers from the people that they were stealing from and enslaving. That is the origin of policing in the United States, which is why we see in the modern day, hundreds of years later, the functioning of policing remains the same. When you're hurt in your neighborhood, when someone's harming you, when you're experiencing abuse, if you are a colonized person or a poor person or a queer or trans person or a sex worker, you know for a fact that you could not hope to call 911 and get help. But if you are a gentrifier, if you are a yuppie, If you are a bank or a corporation and someone's threatening your property, someone's trying to break your window, someone's outside protesting, you know for a fact that you can call 911, you can call the police, and those forces will show up in riot gear with military weapons and put down any resistance that you are facing. And the reason for that is because the function of police within a settler capitalist state is not about protecting the weak. It's not about helping us as colonized and African people. It's not about helping anyone except for the rich and the wealthy and corporations. Because from the very, very, very beginning, the function of policing in the United States and in Western capitalist nations in general was about protecting the wealthy and their stolen property from the poor and the colonized. That is the function of policing under colonialism and capitalism. That is the function of policing in the United States, and it always has been. It always has been. So understanding that, you have to understand that the whole question of like police reform, the whole question of like working with the police as movements fighting for social justice is like, it should be considered a moot point. Because if we understand the origin of policing to be slave patrols and European settler militias, if we understand the origin of policing to be protecting wealthy people from poor people they're stealing from, then we have to understand that they could not possibly be reformed to do anything else. As long as wealthy people exist, as long as the United States is a settler colony, as long as we are living within a capitalist society, the police exist as a force to retain systems of oppression and inequality. That is why they are here. And so, you know, we've had these series of like cyclical mass uprisings against police terrorism in the United States as African and indigenous and colonized peoples continuously struggle against this violent contradiction. We are living in communities that are under literal occupation by police forces. We are living in communities where we are over policed, where we are getting arrested for crossing the street the wrong way or smoking a joint or just like standing on the corner. We are living in a place where we are facing constant oppression from these forces. And every so often, this manifests in like uprisings, like what happened for George Floyd over the summer, when they do something particularly egregious. But we always get to this point where we're like, okay, we rose up, we're marching, we're burning shit down. Like, what do we do? And the conversation always turns towards like, we need to reform the police. We need to hire more African cops. We need to get these police body cams. We need to like pass this reform or that reform. Like right now, the big thing is like qualified immunity, right? And always the conversation is centered around like, how do we change this fundamentally oppressive force? How do we like tinker around the edges of this entity of policing and somehow make it more just? But if we understand that it started off unjust, if we understand that from the very beginning, police only existed to keep us down as African and colonized people, then it forces us to have to change the conversation. If this force only exists to maintain structures of inequality, then there is nothing we can do in terms of reform to change that fundamental relationship. We have to begin to have a different conversation. We have to begin to think about, like, if the role of police is not actually to protect us, then how can we, as colonized and oppressed people, organize to protect ourselves? There's a really good question in the chat, actually, that speaks precisely to this point. But first, let me see what other comments there are. Blah, blah, blah. In what new skin will the snake come forth? Frederick Douglass. Thank you. That's a good quote. Talking about the transition from slave patrols and European settler militias to the modern form of policing. That's a good quote. Marilyn says, that's why police are so hell-bent on protecting property over human lives. They have always been used to manage what Europeans consider property. That is 100% correct. That is 100% correct. The reason why slave patrols were formed is because my ancestors, enslaved African peoples, were considered property. And when we ran away, we were considered stolen property. Like, we were stealing ourselves. And so these organized slave patrols would go out and hunt us down and bring us back to the people that bought and sold us, because we were considered stolen property. We were the property they were trying to protect. Oh my God. Anyway, Marion says, appreciate this channel. I appreciate you, Marion. Comments on the George Floyd Justice Act just passed in the House. We're going to talk about in a second. A bunch of bullshit. Akisi says, I look forward to the day when Indigenous people would read Black Marxism and solidify an analysis of their resistance to the racial capitalist imperialist order. We all have traditions of resistance. We must put our minds together. 100% correct. And then Patrick asks, so who do we call if kids are sexually violated? That's a good question, Patrick, because I think that some people would say we should call the police, right? Like if a kid is molested in your house, or a kid is molested by a neighbor, or a kid is molested by a family member, I guess some people would argue that we should call the police. But one thing about police in 2021 is that police officers themselves are some of the leading committers of sexualized violence against like women, marginalized genders, and children. I don't know if folks remember a couple of years ago when that cop in Oklahoma, the Asian cop, got arrested for raping like dozens of African women. Like police engage in acts of sexual violence against marginalized populations on a regular ass basis. So first of all, to the like a direct answer to the question of who do we call if kids are sexually violated is not more rapists. Certainly not rapists with guns. To me, if the police themselves are committing acts of sexual violence, if the police themselves are molesting children, that is clearly not the person that you call if someone has been harmed in that particular way. What needs to happen, and this is the answer to the question of what do we do if police are only existing to harm us in general, is that we have to organize within our communities to provide protection and defense, rather than relying on this force that again has its origins in slave patrols and land theft and genocide. Instead, we have to organize in African and indigenous and oppressed communities to keep each other safe, to protect each other, to deal with harm and abuse as it comes up. Because even best case scenario, which very rarely happens, you call 911 when someone is raped or sexually assaulted, the police come, they actually do their jobs, and again, this never happens. But best case scenario, they show up, they lock the person up, they hide them away, the person gets put into a prison where they are probably sexually abused, where they are exploited, where they are further alienated, where every single condition that they have within themselves that led to them committing abuse in the first place is made worse, and then they're released back into society to cause more harm. Like that is like the best case scenario under a system where we depend on police and prisons to deal with abuse and harm. It doesn't work. It doesn't end harm. Like I said, that's the best case scenario. Usually what happens when you call the police when someone's been raped is that they show up, they act like you're the problem, they act like you somehow brought the assault on yourself, they victim blame, they accuse people of lying, sometimes they don't even bother to find the person responsible, and they basically just perpetrate more harm. So understanding that in the best case scenario, harm is going to be continued to be perpetrated, and in like the usual case, they're just not helpful at all if they even show up, we have to begin to build alternative solutions for addressing harm in our community. And there are many, many, many frameworks that have been introduced by directly impacted people. Frameworks like transformative and restorative justice. Restorative justice is the idea that when harm is committed, repair has to be done to make the person who like experienced the harm whole. So it's like a form of justice that focuses on reparations. It's not in itself revolutionary, but it's an alternative to systems of punishment, an alternative response to harm that's not focused on just locking people up and warehousing them. And then transformative justice is exactly what it sounds like. It's a form of justice, a form of organizing around justice that focuses on transforming the conditions that produce harm, right? Because it's not that people abuse each other and hurt each other because they're just point blank bad people. They're hurting each other and abusing each other because they live in a society that produces harm and abuse. That is what capitalism and colonialism do. It creates conditions that make people hurt each other. And so transformative justice is about addressing the harm when it happens, so stopping it. But it's also about transforming the conditions that allow that harm to happen and transforming the person that committed the harm themselves. So it's a holistic approach to dealing with abuse that's not about punishment. That's not about locking people up in closets and harming them because they commit harm. That's not about calling in an outside force to bring more violence into our communities. It's actually about transforming the conditions to produce harm as a strategy for stopping harm. So just like a couple of examples, but the bottom line is that if we want to create safety in our communities, if we want to build institutions of community defense, we cannot rely on the police to do that. We must build that ourselves. Let me see. Courtney says the police are trained in a power dynamic that is rooted in harm. They can't resolve the harm. Childhood interactions with the police result in trauma. 100% correct. Bird is recommending a book on transformative justice called Beyond Survival, which I highly recommend. Like that book is comprehensive as hell. There's one, I'm reading it right now actually, and there's like a part that talks about a murdered and missing Indigenous woman and 2 spirit people. And it talks about how, you know, oftentimes these women are killed and the police just do not care. Sometimes the police are part of it. And so these communities have learned they can't rely on police. And it literally talks about a community murder investigation that was carried out independently of the police, where the community was able to find the person who committed a murder and hold them accountable without the police. Like, it has stories that deep about how communities themselves can organize for justice and against conditions of harm and transform the conditions of harm. So definitely recommend Beyond Survival. And then CJK says, but without police who would have detained and harassed me when I was broken living on the street over not paying $1 bus fare. Oh yeah, so this person's saying without police who would have detained and harassed me when I was broken living on the street over not paying $1 bus fare. Probably no one, because that's mostly what police do. They harass poor people. Like here in Albuquerque, during the middle of a pandemic, there are a lot of folks who cannot pay their rent because this country has failed on every level to organize its adequate public health responses. It's basically leaving people abandoned without jobs. And so a lot of people are living on the street in Albuquerque right now in the wintertime, and the police are frequently evicting them. They're living in tents in the park, and the police will come and like take their tent and like push them out of the park, and they don't even care about where they go after that. They're just like, you can't be here. And they keep doing that during a pandemic over and over and over again. So that's what police do. They harass poor people. Aquasi says, facts revolution is what Cedric Roberts said, a process of ontological totality. Cool. So that's the function of police under capitalism and settler colonialism. They exist to protect property. They exist to protect the structures, the exploitative and oppressive structures of settler colonialism and capitalism. And now we want to talk about the role of policing on a global scale and connected to the military and to imperialism. I've been talking for a while, so I just want to pass to Monica to see if you have any thoughts before we get into this subject.
So around the police and the connection to the military and imperialism is that they're all connected. Like the military actually trains the police force, right? And so we see now in our police forces, not ours, excuse me, in the police force, we see them having military training, then having military gear, them using military tactics, right? So we see like riot gear at like protests that are just organizing, demanding equality, right? And so we also see like even, what's that gas that they throw? Tear gas. Tear gas is actually a military weapon. That is not a police weapon. That's a military weapon. And so all of the 3 levels, the military, imperialism, and police, they all serve the same function around control, like that we talked about. And so again, even when we were like cop watching, we would see all the different gears that they had and the different equipment that they were using, like military grade, and police budgets have continued to expand because the equipment that they're buying are like militarizations. And the same department in the military, for example, that's training police are also training Israeli soldiers, right? So all of that is interconnected, and all of it is creating tremendous harm in our communities and is impacting our communities tremendously. Just like the whole thing that I also see is, like you were saying, is they see people as disposable and they exploit them. And so locking people up and making money off of people in private prisons and in prisons, the exploitation and oppression, the same thing that we see in this country is happening in other countries because of Western colonization. And so all of those impacts are all rooted in like exploitation and stolen wealth. So why does imperialism exist? Imperialism exists to control like wealth, like massive wealth of people, and that is exactly what happens here, right? This country has the most people incarcerated per capita by millions. And most of those people who are incarcerated, it's like a $50 billion industry, right? Or plus. And that's exactly connected to imperialism. So that's a little bit of what I have to say. Like they're all connected every single level. And so it's so critical that we look at all of them as connected. And that's why all of those functions must be dismantled because of the tremendous harm that it creates. It creates genocide. It creates people disposability. It exploits people. It oppresses people. It enslaves people all at all levels.
Yep, and as Monica mentioned, there are police who regularly use military weapons against unarmed civilians fighting for justice in the United States. Like for the whole summer, it feels like so long ago, but the George Floyd uprising was like what, from May to probably around July, right? And around the country, we saw police in riot gear with tanks using tear gas, assaulting unarmed people. For the whole summer, they were like shooting people in the eye with rubber bullets. They were tear gassing pregnant women. Like the city of Portland got tear gas, like I think for like a month straight, to the point where people were getting like irregular periods and stuff. So for the whole summer, we saw like extreme police violence using the military weapons that Monica described. And in the comments, I just dropped a link to the Black Alliance for Peace website. Black Alliance for Peace is an anti-imperialist coalition of African organizations that fights against U.S. imperialism. And the statement I linked to is the Black Alliance for Peace statement on the 1033 program. For folks that don't know, the 1033 program is why these random ass police in random ass U.S. cities and towns have tanks. The 1033 program freely gives away surplus military equipment to any police department that requests it. To any police department that requests it. They're getting Bearcats. They are getting robots, like literally like bomb-seeking robots and robots with cameras.
You just said for free?
For free! For free! For free! They just have to ask for it. They're getting assault rifles. They're getting drones. They're getting helicopters. Like, this is where it's coming from. When you see police with a tank in your hood, it is from the 1033 program. And it began under the presidential administration of George W. Bush. And just like AFRICOM, it was drastically expanded under the presidential administration of Barack Obama, the first African president of the United States. But that Black Alliance for Peace statement breaks down the 1033 program and calls for the Biden administration to end it. But that program is why these cops have military weapons. And as someone else pointed out in the chat, not only are some of these weapons like tear gas banned by the Geneva Convention, not only are the police of the United States collaborating with the U.S. military to repress protests, but internationally, police forces in repressive states all around the world are coordinating to find out how to better oppress us. For example, Comrade Olivia in the comments said the Israeli military is training the U.S. police. So the chokehold that murdered George Floyd, the Minneapolis Police Department learned that tactic in a program known as the Deadly Exchange, where Minneapolis police officers traveled to Israel and learned strategies for repression from the fucking IDF. And this is a regular occurrence. Dozens of police departments around the country have traveled to Israel to learn from the IDF how to better oppress colonized people. And how did the IDF learn how to repress colonized people? Well, because they are occupying the state of Palestine. They are stealing Palestinian land. And just like police forces in the United States, Israeli police forces solely exist to protect settlers from the rightful owners of that land, from the Palestinians themselves. So these repressive nations all around the world are literally learning from each other, are trading supplies and tactics in order to brutally repress us. And when it comes to Africa, speaking of Africa, the United States, through AFRICOM, which is the U.S. military's Africa Command, sends police and military forces and contractors to Africa to train police in Africa about how to better repress the people there. So the same people who are arming police in the United States with tanks to repress African people fighting police terrorism here will then travel to Africa and train police in Africa about how to also repress peaceful protesters. Like, do y'all remember NSARS from a couple of months ago? NSARS, the movement, the youth movement in Nigeria, where masses of African youth were in the streets demanding an end to the SARS program. SARS was, of course, like the Nigerian counterpart to SWAT It's like basically an unaccountable militarized police force that was like brutalizing and repressing African youth in Nigeria, breaking up parties and killing people and shit. So the Nigerian youth took to the street and they said, we demand the end to this program. But guess who trained SARS? Guess who trained SARS? It was military contractors under AFRICOM that trained the SARS forces in Nigeria because Nigeria has a neo-colonial government. So these, again, like these repressive states, the US and Israel and neo-colonial governments in Africa and throughout Central and South America, they are collaborating and exchanging tactics and equipment and strategy to repress us. It is a global system of policing meant to keep down movements for social justice. It's all connected. The same people giving the police in our hoods tanks are traveling to Africa and teaching the police there how to kill peaceful protesters, are traveling to Haiti and teaching mercenaries there how to live fire upon peaceful protesters. It's the same motherfucking people all around the world, all working together to keep us down. It's the same people. It's the same people. Policing is a globally oppressive system under capitalism and imperialism. These people are working together, which means any movement against police terrorism, any movement fighting for Black lives, any movement for social justice has to make the same international connections. We have to understand that it's the same people, the same forces, giving the same people hell all around the world. African people are literally catching hell from US trained African police, from US police in the United States, from US trained Haitian police. It's literally the same people with the same weapons and the same funds. Like, it's motherfucking bananas. It's bananas. So Tiernan says the NYPD has a headquarters in Tel Aviv, Israel. I didn't even know that, man. But I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised because there's an extremely high level of coordination between these imperialist states, between these capitalist states. Marion says, I read about General E. William Ward, a Black man, a 4-star general that leads AFRICOM. Yes. Yep, there are African people born in the US at all levels of leadership within AFRICOM. And we got to talk about that. We got to talk about that because we are certainly in a colonized people within the United States, but we are increasingly, especially the petty bourgeois, being integrated into the oppressive structure of imperialism. There are African people born in the US helping the US empire colonize Africa. Like
colonize and kill our own people.
And kill our own.
Where the hell does that make sense at?
We gotta talk about it. Like, the head of the Department of Defense is an African man that used to work for Raytheon. The U.S. ambassador to the UN is an African woman, Linda Thomas Greenfield, who was also in AFRICOM. Like, African people in the U.S. are helping the United States colonize Africa. We're gonna talk about it, man. We gotta talk about it. We should do a show about it because it's fucking gross. Let me see. William says, we gotta deal with the racist sheriffs that recently were probed for multiple white supremacist gangs. They got a tattoo for their first kill. Absolutely. Monique, like Monica pointed out, people talk about how the police has been so-called infiltrated by white supremacists. Like there's like all these reports that come out talking about the FBI and the police have been infiltrated by white supremacists. No, they were not infiltrated. They were white supremacists from the motherfucking beginning. These are just people finding their tribe and joining the police. That's what that is. Like, they were always a white supremacist institution. They always existed to uphold European settler colonialism, which is white supremacist. Like, they're not being infiltrated. They were always white supremacists. Just like the global structure of policing under imperialism is itself a structure of white supremacy. There's a reason why we're not talking about police in Europe getting tanks to repress European people. We're talking about police in the United States. We're talking about police in Africa. We're talking about police in Haiti and Central and South America. All places with majority non-European populations. Because global policing under imperialism and capitalism is a structure of white supremacy. It exists to maintain white supremacy. G4S, biggest employer in Africa, absolutely correct. Shut down AFRICOM, thank you, Megan. Yeah. Whew. The more Marion says, the more I read about imperialism, the more irate I become. That is a reasonable response. It is monstrous. So let me go back to the show plan and see what's next because I lost track of what I'm talking about. Okay, so that's police. That's the police, the military, and imperialism. Understand policing under capitalism and imperialism as a global system, a global structure of white supremacy that exists to oppress non-European peoples fighting against capitalism and imperialism is a global connected structure, a globally connected structure. And then also, one last thing about this is that the U.S. empire itself considers itself like a cop for the world. And understanding that cops are just like a structure of white supremacy, just like a structure of capitalism and whatever, then understand like the role of the U.S. as the world cop is a white supremacist, capitalist, and imperialist role. That's why the Biden administration just bombed Syria out of nowhere. Didn't even ask Congress. They were just like, you know what, we feel like doing this. Ooh, and they fucking droned Syria, killed a couple people. And they said it was a defensive action. They bombed a place like across the world, like thousands of miles away. They bombed Syria, and they said they were doing it as a defensive action against Iran. They bombed Syria to get back at Iran, and they called it self-defense. It makes no sense. Look at Monica. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. But that is what the United States does on a regular basis. They regularly just get a wild hair up their ass and bomb sovereign countries around the world and say they're doing that for protection. They're doing that for self-defense. They're doing that for justice. Like, that is how the U.S. functions on the global stage.
And people are like, but just give Biden a chance. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
I will never give Biden a chance. I will never. Like, I was completely my heart is closed to that man. Well, first of all, he's been in office for like 40 years. Like, it's very clear who he is. And so the people that are like, let's just see what he's gonna do. And we already know what he's gonna do. You just were not paying attention.
Yeah.
But the point being, sorry, go ahead.
Too many people believe that this system really cares for them. Like, if you review history, if you review all like historical knowledge, even in the last 10 years, even 15, even 20, when has this government ever cared about people? Never. So what would make Biden different when he was part of all those administrations, when he was part of Congress? Nothing ever changed. He still has his reputation of what he votes for and what he doesn't vote for. So it's real, it's in front of our faces. It's not hidden. All we have to do is seek it, read it, and then believe it, right? I forgot what ancestor said, like, if they show you who they are the first time, believe them. So next, go ahead, were you gonna?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, there's like a person who I find very annoying, but has this like really good saying. He always says, believe in your people as much as you believe in the Democratic Party. Because people really seem to have like endless faith in the Democratic Party. And like Democratic politicians, like, this is the time. This is the time when they're gonna be good. And I'm like, why? Why?
Why? I believe that under Obama, like the first, and I was like, wait, nothing's changed. And then I learned, like, okay, I get it. I get it. But it took me a minute, right? Like, because we're all colonized, right? We're colonized. And so being able to unpack that. But I like that saying, believe in your people as much as you believe in, because people believe up and down. Like, when you say something about the Democratic Party, people want to eat you alive. And I'm like, are y'all serious? So I'm gonna let that one's gonna sink in.
Also, people are saying it's a Maya Angelou quote, which I did not know. This person said he made it up. So I don't find Maya Angelou annoying. I love her. So if that's actually her quote, then I take it back. But it's still a good saying. But yeah, so the overall point I'm trying to make by bringing up Biden's action in Syria, the so-called defensive bombing of a country like thousands of miles away, is that is how the U.S. functions on a global scale. They are constantly saying, oh, this person over here is doing something we don't like, and so we have the right to go in and like drone bomb and sanction and just police people to get them to do what we want. That is how the United States functions on a global level. They act as the world's police. They commit acts of violence with impunity and say it's justified because they have deemed an action wrong. That is the story of the relationship of the United States to Iran. That is the story of the relationship of the United States to Haiti. That's the story of the relationship of the United States to the entire continent of Africa. The United States acts unilaterally as a cop on the world stage to control the actions of non-European people. So understand, like, you have to understand the Biden administration's actions in Syria, the Biden administration's actions in Somalia, the Biden administration's actions in Haiti as part of this global imperialist, capitalist, and white supremacist structure of policing of non-European people. So that is the police, the military, and imperialism. And now, as always, we want to get into some solutions, right? Because we don't just like examine a problem and talk about how much it sucks and not talk about what to do about it. That's useless. Now we want to talk about what we should do, and we're going to pass it back to Monica.
Solutions, and this kind of got into a little bit about a question, a comment, a question put in the chat earlier that Onya Sabu talked about. So we're going to talk about a little bit. So alternatives to police. So I'm going to talk about organized community defense and turn it back over to Onya Sabu to talk about abolish and community control. So organizing community defense. So as we talked about earlier, you know, police use like lethal force even in emergency like 911 calls when people are having mental health crises. Especially we've seen this in Albuquerque where APD is considered the #1 most violent police department in the country, where they're 4 years in a row have the highest police fatal shootings. And so because we know that system does not work, the police system does not work because they were embedded in white supremacy to control property, to control our people. And we know it doesn't work. We have to have alternatives. We have to have solutions. And so we have to dream this together of what that could be and what that could look like. And we have to start building those structures now, And so what we want to talk about is organizing community defense. A lot of times when people hear of community defense, they narrow down that word defense and they think it's only for us to have the ability to protect ourselves. And it has that. So that is there, definitely in there. But other things that are part of it is also what Onya Sabu was talking about, transformative justice and restorative justice. Those are also components and infrastructures that we can build as alternatives to police. Right now, 93% of crime that occurs is survival crime. So people are trying to survive. There is deep-rooted trauma, deep-rooted colonialization. And so we have to unpack that and we have to heal and work together to organize and build institutions that we need. And so for me, I'm speaking a little bit for me. So when I'm saying defund police and divest funds, we can put those funds back into the community, where we need, right? Where we need things for the community. And so our elder care program, all African People's Revolutionary Party here, our New Mexico chapter, we have an elder care program. So we know during the pandemic and also in general, there is food insecurity. And so we want to make sure our African elders have what they need. And so our elder care program that we talked about, that we built, that's also community defense, right? So we're creating these like institutions of care where we're able to make sure that we can meet our own needs. We can meet our own needs because we know the government, the city, they're not meeting our needs. We can do that. So we were all growing food. We were also, many of you in the community also contributed financially or contributed by sharing goods, where we're able to make sure our elders receive a care package every Saturday, right? And we check in with them during the week. Also, something that we're trying to do is build a garden, AAPRP in collaboration with Millions for Prisoners, right? So that's also a form of community defense, right? We saw Black Panthers, they built healthcare clinics and they had breakfast programs. All of those are institutions of community self-defense, created for community, by community, communities involved in creating and making sure those things are there for us to take care of one another and for us to take care of one another. And so we have to build those things that are critical. There's a lot of things that right now around Albuquerque that actually came and was envisioned by communities. So like those first choice clinics and those community dental, those didn't exist. Those existed because communities wanted those to happen. What happened was organizations took control of those programs, but those were all envisioned by community. Even the South Broadway Library, even though the city owns it, that was Chicano and African organizers wanting to have a library that wasn't this big, that fit 12 kids. And they were like, we want a library in our community. And they organized it. It happens to be now under the city of Albuquerque. but we want to build our own controlled institutions where we take care of one another. An example of that is what they did in Portland. And Onya Sabu, I don't know if you would like to talk about it, what you all were able to build around community defense for like children in the breakfast program.
Wait, yeah, I can talk about that. Also, I didn't know that though, like first choice in the library came from community organizing. I did not know that, so thank you. And that reminds me of how like WIC, the federal program WIC, so which provides like food to mothers, pregnant mothers with children, that came from a Black Panther Party program. So like, there's all these situations where like communities organized to protect and defend themselves, and then later on, the government came in and was like, okay, we're gonna take this over. Like that really shows the power we have when we're organized, like what we can actually build. To the point where like the government, which has all this money and power and all these like institutions, it's like, oh, I guess we can learn from that. Like that's wild. Like we have so much power. But yeah, so in Oregon, that's where I joined the APRP. I was recruited by my comrade Ajamu into the APRP 8 years ago in Portland, Oregon. And in what we did in Oregon, it's like the biggest majority European city in the United States. Like mad white. But if you are a person engaged in revolutionary African organizing, it's actually not hard to find African people. What we did is we did demographic research to identify the area with the densest African population. It was a place called New Columbia. It had a National Guard station right outside of it with like visible tanks. It had the highest density of African people. It has the highest number of 911 calls and police responses. And so we were like, clearly this is where we need to build with our people. So we identified that area, and then we went knocking and talking to people door to door. Like we knocked on like hundreds of doors and just like introduced ourselves and talked about who we were and asked them like, what do you need to see in this community that does not exist? Like what do your children need? Like what is not being provided that is needed in this community? And in conversation after conversation after conversation, parents and community members and youth were like, we don't get, if we like show up late to school, we don't get breakfast, we don't get food. And then also, when we are in school, we don't learn about like true African history. We don't learn about African figures. We don't learn about anything that makes us proud of ourselves as African people. So hearing that, we were like, all right, we can help with that. So we decided to form a breakfast program that we modeled after the Black Panther Party's free breakfast program. We collaborated with an African business owner and very, very nice Jamaican man who owned a coffee shop. We talked to him about who we were and what we wanted to do. And he's like, yeah, you could use my space for free. And so what we did is that on Mondays and Fridays, starting at 7 a.m., we started feeding youth in the community. It was completely free and open. And we would feed them like pancakes and oatmeal and fruit and hard-boiled eggs and like good food. At the same time, we would give them like mini lessons about African history. Because they said, I go to school and all I hear about is like Napoleon, Thomas Jefferson, all these like slave masters and rapists. I don't hear about Africa. And so we would teach them about African history. We would teach them about revolutionary African leaders. We would also provide them examples of strong revolutionary African leaders in real life. And so what we were trying to do was like feed them nourishing food, but also like nourish their brains. Also like fill them with pride in themselves, and also like help them understand that they have a role to play in the liberation of their people, that our struggle is still ongoing. So we did that for like a year or so. And it only took like 6 months to get going. I was kind of shocked by how easy it was. And also by the fact that like we never had grant funding. We are not a nonprofit. There's no APRP chapter that's a nonprofit. Like literally we decided to make this breakfast program and we just organized the resources of the community to build it. We did not have outside funding. The program was built from the ground up by the community and by the APRP. So we did that for about a year. And then the coffee shop was in the ground floor of like state-owned housing, like subsidized housing. And then eventually like the city started like harassing the coffee shop owner. Started being like, your rent is late when it wasn't. Started being like, just like showing up with like for random inspections, basically harassing him because we were working there because they considered us a threat. So eventually they like successfully pushed that African man out of that building because of that program, because they were threatened by it. But the parents and the youth in the community were like, we still need this. We still want this. Like, how do we keep doing this? And so later on, we were like, we found like an African woman who was a pastor who said, you can use my basement for whatever program you want. And we started working with the parents, and the parents were like, we would like to build a school for our children that's like African centered. And so from there, the breakfast program, thanks to the collaboration with this African pastor, this church, and these community members that wanted something bigger, we were able to form an African centered school, the School of African Roots, where it was like a coalition of African community organizations who each Sunday would take a day and like teach an entire African centered curriculum from their perspective. We work with like the Nation of Islam, We're with the Moors. At one point, there was like a nonprofit, but they did not last for a lot of reasons. But we were able to build this school in partnership with the parents and youth of this community. So we were able to expand the breakfast program, even though it had been attacked by the state, into something that was like much bigger and still exists to this day. So that's like an example of like building a community defense program, and also an example of what we mean when we say like community defense is not just about, you know, armed self-defense or about, you know, responding to harm. It's also about building community institutions that are controlled by the people living in a place, that are built from the ground up by those people and not controlled by the state.
Another one is, thank you for like sharing, like, man, all of that is possible here, right? Look how many like churches, like buildings there are, right? Like, look how many of those facilities there are. Look how many of us that are organizing and want to build these things for our kids. All of that is possible. Avery was like, oh, that's cool, a breakfast program and kid activities. And I was like, yeah, he's like, I want to do that. Like, all of that is possible. And I also think about like, we have a lot of mental health crises happening. And we've seen people in the community go and help. And we don't have like an infrastructure or a number of people can call when those things happen. They reach out to their networks. And we see like the Allied People's Coalition, they're trying to create an infrastructure, right? An alternative emergency number that people can actually call. And so that's a community defense, right? Like, we build it, it's by the people, for the people. Exactly another example that Anya Sabu just shared. So those are some examples of what we can do. And we also know we have to create spaces for transformative justice as well as restorative justice. Because of Western colonization and its impacts, we do have people who are struggling on so many levels with so many different things. But if we create those institutions of care, communities of care, as the Red Nation just recently wrote a blog about this, like, we have the ability to change, like to change the now, to change the future. So we don't have all of that deep trauma that continues for generations to generations. And so we have to work to organize to create those communities of care through community defense.
And so now the last thing we want to talk about is some of the proposals that have been put forward by like social justice organizations and revolutionary organizations about what to do about these police. The proposal of community control police and the proposal of abolish. But before I get into that, I want to briefly mention the George Floyd Act that was passed in the U.S. House of Representatives, because someone asked about it. So for folks that don't know, on Wednesday night, yesterday, the U.S. House of Representatives passed this bill called the George Floyd Act. It's named obviously after George Floyd, an African man that was murdered by Minneapolis police, like on camera, very slowly. And so this George Floyd Act has a ban on racial profiling. It has an overhaul of qualified immunity for police. And it also has a ban on the use of chokeholds. All of those things, when you first hear them, like, sound fine, but the fact of the matter is that this is just going to be another form of reform that's not going to lead to meaningful changes in the relationship of police to our community. And what I mean by that is that, like, for example, you can ban a chokehold, but police have an entire array of ways they can use to murder people. They got their guns. I read a story about people being tased to death on a regular basis. They have their chemical weapons. They have their batons. So even if a chokehold is banned, no, it wouldn't. So the school in Portland was called the School of African Roots, SOAR. And the bill does not ban qualified immunity. It says it overhauls qualified immunity. So it just reforms it. But, so yeah, and it also says it bans chokeholds and it bans racial profiling. So like I said, banning a chokehold does not address the fact that police are able to kill people and get away with it. They have many, many, many ways they can do that, and this bill does not stop them from doing that. So they can't use a chokehold. They have many, many, many other ways to do it. One of the worst stories I've ever read about how police have killed a person is an African man that was in a county lockup who was left in a shower that was turned all the way up until his skin peeled off. So they didn't even use their batons, their tasers, their guns, or a chokehold. They just left him in a place, in an environment that was not conducive to his survival. These are things they do all the time. all the time, all the time. They lock people up and deny them medical attention. They lock people up with disabilities or chronic illness and deny them access to medical care. Like, police find many, many, many creative ways of committing murder and getting away with it. And so banning one particular way that they do that is not addressing the fundamental relationship. Additionally, although the George Floyd Act bans racial profiling, like, what does that even mean? They're still going to over-police African people. Like, that on paper, it says you're not allowed to do that, but you're still going to disproportionately arrest African people. There's not going to be any consequences. It says it bans chokeholds, but they can still use everything else to kill us. It says it overhauls qualified immunity, but it doesn't get rid of it. And then on top of that, the George Floyd Act includes an additional $750 million for police. It gives them more money.
That was more than what Biden said. They went from 300 million to 750 million. Oh my gosh.
On paper, this additional $750 million included for police in this George Floyd Act is so that the police can investigate themselves for deadly use of force. They're giving them almost $1 billion in this bill that is supposed to address police misconduct to investigate themselves, y'all. To investigate themselves. At the same time as these people are saying a deeply inadequate $15 minimum wage, $15 an hour minimum wage is not going to be possible. At the same time as these people who are like, if you help us win the Georgia runoffs, we're going to give you $2,000. Psych, we're going to give you $1,400. Psych, maybe, maybe not. At the same time as these people are like hemming and hawing about your stimulus, they're giving police $750 million to investigate themselves. How do you pass a bill that's supposed to be about addressing police violence and find a way to give police more money? Only in the United States, y'all. Only in the fucking United States. Oh my motherfucking God.
I'm baffled of this brilliant facade. That's why I haven't liked any comments. I'm like, no, I need to read this. And so I'm so glad that we're talking about it now. Like the facade of, I knew it was too good to be true. I was like, wait, Biden's overturning qualified immunity. This doesn't feel right.
So yeah, someone just asked what's the name of the bill. It's the George Floyd Act. It's so insulting. It's so insulting. First of all, this man, the reason why he was even encountered the police in the first place is because he used the counterfeit bill, a counterfeit $20 bill, $20 motherfucking dollars. He used the counterfeit bill in a convenience store, and the police got called on him. So in that situation, it's not even actually clear that he was racially profiled. Someone called the police on him.
Exactly. I'll drop the bill in the comments because somebody just shared it with me because I wanted to read it.
So this bill, bans chokeholds, but police can kill us other ways. It bans racial profiling, but this man was not even racially profiled. And it gives $750 million to the police. $750 more money, and they put this African man's name on this bill. And it's in no way, shape, or form going to address the situation that led to him getting murdered. It's so blatantly fucked up. Like, they're just like playing in our faces, y'all. They're playing in our faces. They're saying you can't have a stimulus check. You've been out of work for a year. You're $10,000 behind on rent. You don't qualify for unemployment. You got $1,200 total, maybe from these past stimuluses. They can't even send you out another check, but they're gonna give the police $750 million more to investigate themselves. And that's supposed to be for social justice, y'all. Anyway, so yeah, George Floyd Act is not meaningful for reform. It is not going to address the problem of police terrorism. It is just yet another handout to police to better fund them as they brutally repress us. For more information about the George Floyd Act, I think Monique is going to put the text of the bill in the chat, and I just shared a Guardian article written by Dereka Purnell, breaking down why the George Floyd Act is a bunch of bullshit, which I encourage folks to check out. Please do not fall for these symbolic attempts at reform. I actually cannot believe they put the name of this man on this bill when this is what the bill is actually doing. How do you give police more money after killing someone? Like, what the hell? Like, what is wrong with y'all? Anyway, so Sundown Moon says, I step into the chat for 1 minute I'm already learning of a new capitalist atrocity. I hate it here. I agree with you. I also hate it here. I don't know how to say your name, but they say the George Floyd Act is the state rewarding their lapdogs for violence. Yes, they got almost $1 billion for killing that man to investigate themselves. Why would you need more money to investigate yourselves? Why would you need almost $1 billion? It doesn't even make sense. Anyway, CJ says that the US dollar isn't already inherently counterfeit like the entire settler state. Correct. 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 Who called the police for a fake $20 bill? Get your life together. Like, a man died for a counterfeit $20 bill. He probably didn't even know that shit was counterfeit. Like, it's just fucking bananas. And then they give police an additional almost $1 billion for that after that man is dead, and then he put his name on that shit. Like, y'all are trifling, fucking trifling. Anyway, so Monica talked about what we do as alternatives to police. She talked about the importance of organizing for community defense. She talked about how community defense isn't just armed self-defense, but also building community institutions to serve the needs of our community that our people control. So now we just want to finish up by talking about some of the proposals put forth by revolutionary organizations for how to deal with the immediate problem of these capital-ass police. So there's two proposals that are kind of like in the mainstream right now within the revolutionary movement, that some folks are for one and some folks are for the other. The two proposals are abolishing the police and community control. Abolishing the police is exactly what it sounds like, just getting rid of them completely as an institution. It is something that's been put forward as a proposal by folks in Minneapolis, but folks all around the world. But Minneapolis got a lot of coverage for it because after the George Floyd Uprising, is one of the primary demands was to abolish the police. Community control of the police says that the people within a community should have control over the police forces in that community. Whether those police forces are the ones that exist right now, or whether those police forces are the ones that are created by the community itself. It says that if there are police are going to exist, the community has to have control over those police. So that means like hiring and firing power. That means their policies. That means the entire structure of them. Community control police people say that the community itself should control police forces. So oftentimes, like right now what's happening, there's like a debate between these two positions. Abolish people who are saying community control just like hands over the reins of an oppressive institution that's all going to be oppressive. Community control people saying that we can't hope to abolish the police until we have control of them first. I would just like to say, like, I have read both sides of this position, and I have not decided how I feel about it. But I do think the more I learn, the more I read about abolish versus community control, the more I begin to understand that these two proposals are not actually in conflict. They're not actually opposed to each other. Because in order to abolish the police, in order to get to a point where a community can say, we do not want to have police, you first must gain control of that institution. If the city or the state controls the police force, they're not going to let you get rid of that shit. First, you have to build up a movement that is organized enough and strong enough and militant enough to demand control of that institution in order to get rid of it. They're not going to let you vote away the police. They're just not. They're just not. And so that is why I don't think that community control of police is actually in opposition to the goal of abolish. I think that a community can organize, can build itself from the ground up to be strong enough to demand control of police forces, and then that community can say, we don't want police anymore. And I feel like that's the only way abolish is actually going to happen in a meaningful way. What I mean by that I mentioned after the George Floyd Uprising, a leading demand of social justice organizations in Minneapolis was to abolish the police. They put a proposal before the Minneapolis City Council, and I think the Minneapolis City Council said that they would do it. I'm trying to remember the details, I don't know exactly. And then they also put up the same proposal up in schools, and they said we want the police out of schools. And the schools passed it. And then what happened afterwards is that the schools put up a job posting, and they said, we would like a private security force, and we would like you to have police experience. And so that actually shows what's going to happen if we do not organize communities from the ground up to have the power to actually control and abolish these forces. Is that all they're going to do is say, okay, on paper, the police are abolished, and also we have this private security force that we're going to use instead. Unless the community is organized from the ground up to take care of its own defense, protection, and safety, all that's going to happen is that the ruling class, the capitalist class, is going to find a way to impose police on us anyway. And there's like a long, long, long history of this particular strategy. Like Blackwater, for example, the mercenary contractor force that engages in acts of terrorism all over the world, is a private security force. Those are not police, but those are European men with guns that travel around brutally repressing people. in like the militant labor struggles of the early 20th century. It was police certainly putting down those forces, but it was also private security forces hired by the companies that were experiencing strikes who were policing those labor struggles. So throughout history, we see this trend of not just police aligning with the capitalist state, but also private security forces being brought in to engage in policing as well. That is why we do actually have to organize communities to build power, to have a say in how they are protected and defended. Because otherwise, if we just say, okay, I'm going to use the existing, structure of democracy, of bourgeois democracy, to abolish the police, we're going to vote the police out. All the capitalist class is going to do is bring in private police. Bring in private police. So I don't actually believe that community control and abolish are like opposing goals. I actually think that one needs to happen in order for the other to be accomplished.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So I definitely want to be transparent. I don't know as much about community control as much as I know about abolish, which is like where I'm grounded in. And so do you people who are making the argument for community control, do you feel that the community could ever have control over that institution, over the police as an institution, like how it in like Western society? Like, do you think that's even possible?
Yes. I think yes. Because like I just said, like, so let's say that we organize a community like by block and then by neighborhood and then by like school or district or elder council, like basically from the ground up, we have organized every single segment of the community. I feel like that is the minimum level of organization required to achieve community control. Because I don't think that it's something that's going to happen where you like organize and get a measure put on the ballot and then people vote for the measure and then the community has control of the police. Like that's not going to happen. Like the ruling class is not going to allow people to just be like, we would like to vote to control the police now. They're just not going to do that.
Thank you. That was what I had envisioned. Like that's not going to happen. So thank you for bringing clarity.
But at the same time, when we talk about abolish, when we talk about defund, they are absolutely not going to do that either. Like if we were to organize, they put on a ballot measure that said we would like to abolish the police. If that ballot measure passed, they would find a way not to abolish the police. Like they're just not going to do it through a simple vote. Like either community control or abolish is not going to happen unless communities are organized from the ground up to wield power and to have a say in how their communities are defended. That's the only way either of these objectives are going to be accomplished. It's not going to be a vote. It's not going to be a campaign. It's not going to be a ballot measure. It's going to be a community that is organized from the ground up to assert itself. That's the only way. The only way. Because you could say, like, we introduced this measure to abolish the police, and then a majority of people voted for it, and the city will just be like, no, thank you. Or they'll be like in Minneapolis. They'll be like in Minneapolis where they're like, okay, sure. And then they bring in like Pinkertons. They bring in private security forces. So understanding like whether you're for abolish or whether we're for control, neither objective is going to be achieved within the parameters of the existing system. You must organize communities from the ground up to have the power to achieve those things.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely don't think of that as mutually exclusive as I'm hearing more about it. They're definitely connected.
Cool. And then I feel like you put a note for me, but I can't. What did you say?
Oh, it's because I deleted it. I got like 3 minutes. Well,
all right. Let's wrap this up, dog. Okay, so yeah, we actually kind of talked about current events. We talked about bombing Syria to hurt Iran and how that's ridiculous. And the last thing I want to say about that is that when it comes to the $15 hour minimum wage, there's like this person in Congress called the parliamentarian who is not elected, who is becoming the scapegoat for why $15 hour minimum wage cannot be up for a vote this session, because they're saying that she decided, not on the docket. There's nothing that can be done. So Joe Biden's like, I have to respect the separation of powers. Like Congress passes the laws and I can't override them. So they're putting all this on the parliamentarian. Biden's like, I just don't have the power to do that. I can't overrule. But when it came to bombing Syria, he was just like, I'm just going to decide to do that. I don't need approval from Congress. I don't need approval from the American people. I'm just going to fucking bomb Syria because I feel like it to hurt Iran. I don't need a vote of any kind. So when it comes to imperialism, Joe Biden, the Biden administration does not care about the separation of powers or whatever. When it comes to paying people $15 an hour, all of a sudden he's all about the structure and the procedure and the separation of powers. That to me is very, very funny. Very, very funny. So yeah, Also, the Biden administration, there was recently a Business Insider article that went around talking about the Biden administration hasn't droned anybody. That is not true. That is not true. That is not true. If you saw that article, it is not true. The Biden administration has conducted several drone strikes in Somalia since January 20th. Biden is still drone bombing Africa. And I'm going to pass it to Monica so we can keep wrapping this up.
I'm really glad that you talked about that. It's really important to see what this administration is doing. Continuing what the last administration did. So we at AAPRP for a couple weeks in a row shared with you about one of our comrades facing eviction, and just want to do a deep-hearted thank you to you all, because you all's gifts and contributions and support helped to support our comrade facing this eviction, being able to meet their needs. And so again, as community, us always being able to come together, so you were able to support with that. We also learned that the federal eviction moratorium in March is gone. It's gone. A judge said it's unconstitutional. So that moratorium that was there at the federal level doesn't exist. We know the moratorium didn't exist anyway because we have tons of people being evicted. And we had couple comrades face eviction in AAPRP, and we also saw what happened with Celinda very publicly. And so as a community, we're gonna have to get together to organize around tenants rights, evictions. We're gonna have to do that. There are 30, 40 million people facing evictions, and a one-time stimulus check is not gonna help people. People need monthly stimulus checks to provide for their needs. Y'all, mental health is going everywhere because people are stressing so much about how they're going to meet their needs. People are being forced to isolate because they're just trying to stay alive. There's so much happening, but that financial stress doesn't have to be there. There's enough money. $750 million is going to be voted into police, that we just learned. Like, that money should be going into $15 an hour. It should be going into monthly stimulus checks. So we're gonna have to get together and organize for our communities. And in closing, we just wanna share with you, Jamu and Shakira, they're gonna have a show on Sunday, 5 p.m. So follow Jamu's page for more information. Tune in next week on AAPRP weekly on Thursdays live. We're going to be talking about from Black Power to Pan-Africanism and how that is important for us as a people. Join an organization. Join an organization. If you're not part of one, we need you. If you're in Albuquerque, if you're in New Mexico, we need you to be part of AAPRP. I keep trying to get my son to join. He hasn't told me no yet. He hasn't told me no yet. But join AAPRP here. We need you. Like, the only way that we're going to dismantle this system, the only way we're going to win African liberation and land back and everybody have their land back is if we're organized, because we're out organized, right? We're not outnumbered, but we're definitely out organized. And so join an organization, find one. If you have an organization, if you're involved in an organization and you're listening right now, drop your organization in the comments where they can get more information to get involved. So we are the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We're organizing for a one unified socialist Africa. And thank you so much for tuning in today. Stay ready for the revolution, y'all.